What's up, folks? I wanted to go ahead and sit down and do like a quick meta list review. And right now is kind of a perfect time. I thought I may have missed the boat a little bit, but then I saw the Gold Squadron podcast recording of the last three of the last games at the Saint-Laurent Open up in Montreal. And that just made it triple clear that the current meta menace is still the meta menace. So let's go ahead and dive in and break down. I'm going to talk about the Han Solo list that's really dominating the X-Wing meta right now. Talk through what it does, why it does, and talk a little bit about some of the things it does in a particular fashion or some of the things that can maybe be done to play around it. Now, just as some quick background here, I played against this list kind of when it first made a splash back in this past summer at the Lone Star Open outside of Dallas. I played against it twice, or two variants of it, and I played as this list, or I played this list in practice a couple times, and then also I've watched a bunch of battle reports. That said, I am not generally a Rebels pilot. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, but hopefully this is helpful in understanding what this is, how it works, and kind of how to deal with it. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and talk about the elephant in the room. That, of course, being Han Solo himself, the scoundrel for hire, the customizable YT 1300 light freighter for Rebels, coming in at, I believe, 8 points, and we'll double check that in a second. Han Solo has a pretty terrible action bar, focus, lock, red boost, rotate arc, and it's got a bow tie arc with 3 dice out each direction, 1 single evade die, a whopping 8 hull and 5 shields, and initiative 6. So this is really good. And then the ability here, of course, after you roll dice, if you are at range 0 to 1 of an obstacle, you may re-roll all of your dice. This does not count as re-rolling for the purpose of other effects. Now, this is really important for a couple different reasons. Because in sort of classic times, back in the day when this card first came out, it was pretty common to see Han Solo, and you would target lock. So you'd lock focus. So you'd somehow get both a lock and a focus, however you chose to do that. You would re-roll with your lock, and then you could re-roll again with Han's ability because he does let you roll both times. And there's no limit to this. It's for both offense and defense. There's a lot of kind of key things that make this an extremely powerful ability. But I do want to make sure you're aware that there is a tether. So you do have to be at range 0 to 1 of an obstacle. So if you're on it, of course, you can't shoot unless you have some modification that lets you do that. But you still will be able to re-roll your defense dice. And if you're at range 1 of it, you'll also be able to re-roll all of your dice, including your offensive dice. Now, where does that get scary? So we're going to look at the first iteration of the Han Solo list that really kind of hit this summer after the points changes, and that is that same Han Solo pilot with the combination of the gunner Bistan, who reads, after you perform a primary attack, which this has the 3-die bow tie turret, if you are focused, so if you still have a focus token, you may perform a bonus turret attack, which is a turret arc, against a ship you have not already attacked this round. Couple key things. There are a fair number of different upgrades or options that will give you bonus attacks. It is very rare that that upgrade allows you to shoot out of the same arc. You look at veteran tail gunner, veteran turret gunner, both of those give you a second shot out of a different arc. It can be pointed the same direction, but usually isn't. So usually it's a front back or it's a straight left, straight right, whatever. But so this one does allow you to shoot twice out of the same arc. So the way this Han positions itself gets this ideal firing lane and then shoots 2 ships in that lane in the same turn. The thing that really supercharges this is both Bistan and Perceptive Copilot, which reads, after you perform a focus action, gain 1 focus token. So you focus, you get 2 tokens automatically. So now Han is double modded because he has the ability to just reroll all of his dice and then can spend a focus on that result and then can perform that bonus attack with Bistan. And as long as he has the focus token when he performs the attack, he can then still spend that second focus on the second attack. So we're talking 2 double modded attacks at initiative 6 with a base 3 attack dice. And this is the original version of this list that has Chopper, which is during the perform action step, you may perform 1 action even while stressed. After you perform an action while stressed, suffer 1 damage unless you expose 1 of your damage cards. Now he's 1 point, but the reason that this comes in is if you get a crit or something happens to give you double stress tokens. That is the only way that Han on his own cannot perform a focus action. So this is a way to ensure against that, so that even if you're double stressed, you can always continue to do the focus action even if you're not. Because right now, even if you bump into an opposing ship, you can always choose to take the stress to take the focus action, which does still trigger Perceptive Copilot. So there's that. And then this list also included engine upgrade to change that red boost into a white boost, so you could boost without stressing. it was extremely rare that you would do so, but you could. And in a pinch where you needed to boost, it was really nice to be able to have that white boost instead of the red, so you could stay unstressed. And then, of course, the Millennium Falcon title that adds the evade action and says that while you defend, if you're evading, you may reroll one defense die. That's really just for flavor. That does basically nothing for Han because he already has the reroll. The only time that would trigger is if you are not at range 0 to 1 of an obstacle, and then you get a free defense die if you have taken the evade action, which you will never do. So it was a little bit funny on this. There were a couple different ways that people built this Han, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the key piece is that 16-point combination of Perceptive Copilot and Bistan, again, giving you those 2 double-modded attacks. Super, super, super powerful, and you see why that has been a staple of the meta for so long now, because that is what it does. He's 7 points too, so not 8 like I thought before. So he comes in a reasonably budget price for that custom Han. Rounding out the rest of the list, we have the staple T-65 X-Wing Luke Skywalker. That's the pre-built from the Battle of Yavin campaign. Comes with instinctive aim, so you can fire torpedoes or missiles without target lock. Attack speed, which is something unique to the quick build. Says after you fully execute a 3 or 4 straight maneuver, you may perform a boost using the 1 straight template. This is not an action, which is really good. It gives you a lot of extra mobility in times when you may need it if you want to just boogie straight forward. That does make him extremely aggressive, so he can jump straight in there and pull off a focus, so boost focus, and then get his torpedo off without needing the target lock to do it, which is crazy because he has that proton torpedoes to throw the 4 dice. Is initiative 5 as Luke. Excuse me, God. And then as the typical pilot ability, after you become the defender, before dice are rolled, you may recover 1 force. So he's just an X-Wing, only has the 2 evade dice and only has 2 recurring force, but will always have a force on hand when he is the defender, which is really good and makes him quite a bit more tanky than your average X-Wing. That said, we'll talk about that in a minute. Never mind. Still is better than your average X-Wing. We round this out with Kyo Venzi, the 3-point A-Wing, whose ability is very confusing, but long story short, you can sideslip if you do not have force. She's got 1 force point that's non-recurring, so it doesn't come back unless you do this. So you use your force for an offensive or defensive mod, then you can the following turn, you may side slip. And then when you perform a side slip, that's how you recover that force. So it's a little bit weird in that you are not always able to side slip and you're not always able to gain your force. There's a kind of a dance you have to do there, but this is still a 3-point A-Wing with a force, which is really, really, really good and still has 8 loadout and can do a lot of things. At the time that I ran this, played against it and practiced it, the thing to do was juke. So if you were evading, which Kyo tended to take the evade action a lot, while you perform an attack, if you're evading, you may change one of the defender's evade results to an eyeball result. And then if that defender didn't have a focus token or force, which she's a low initiative at, I believe, 3, she tended to shoot late, so chances are most tokens were already spent by the time she shot, so that juke has more impact than you would normally expect on a higher initiative pilot. So that was good. You could also put missiles on there. You could also put the config on there, which we will again talk about in a second. But more than anything, Kyo is there as a tarpit, a trap, an A-Wing that has, 2 shields, 2 hull, is very, very hard to take down and is an exceptional objective grabber. So objective monkey, distraction piece, something that people should never, ever shoot at, but is always very tempting to shoot at as the least hard target in the list. Rounding this list out was going to be Fen Rao and the Fang Fighter, that 5-point rebel Fen Rao, whose ability is a little bit weird. Before a friendly ship at range 1 to 2 engages, if there's an enemy ship in its front arc at range 1, that friendly ship may remove 1 non-lock red token. Just a little bit of stress control, can help take off a lot of bad tokens, but the biggest reason you would take this is it's a 5-point initiative 6 with 3 attack dice. So this would take the place of your end game ace, is a game that you wanted to keep in there, would shoot first before a lot of other ships in the game, and kind of give you some offensive punch. And of course, coming in with the typical Mandalorian upgrades, I'm not totally sure this was the original build, but this is the thing that would absolutely make sense. You've got Best Guard to negate crits. You've got Mandalorian optics to take free target locks. You have clan trading to do a bump focus, so a stress focus, even if you didn't bump. So you can do a barrel roll lock, I believe. No, so you can take a target lock and then still get a focus token in the engagement phase, which is really good to give you double modeled attacks. Kind of is a little bit weird in Mandalorian optics, which gives you 2 chances to get a free target lock in the system phase, but nah, so it's 1 point. So it's one that's easy to put on there. And then of course, Predator for the additional offensive mods. This is a very dangerous piece, but it is a 5-point ship with no shield. So it's always kind of an iffy piece. So that is kind of the breakdown of the basic list. And so just looking at this, the thing right off the bat I want to make sure to highlight is that it's a 4-ship list. Of course, stating the obvious here, but in terms of objective control and board control, this will struggle, especially because that Han wants to stay out of the fight, which also means staying away from objectives or not contesting objectives as aggressively as some other ships will, just because if Han gets into a dangerous spot, that one evade die is really going to hurt. And then also you have to be next to a obstacle to trigger your rerolls with Han. So if you leave the obstacle zone, if you go into a middle where there are no obstacles, you lose that reroll, and that's huge for Han. It really drops your offensive output, and then also will hurt your defense as well. So not really terrifically good at objectives. Also the highest point cost ship in the list by far. So it's your points fortress. So it's going to be out of the fight. It has a ton of hit points. And the way it's flown is keeping it out of the scrum, so it's not likely to go down. And the ship itself is very fast. So it's one of those challenging pieces where the way this list works is Han kind of flies around the edge of the board and plinks at you from the sides. And then Luke just straight up jousts you, runs straight at your face. Keo stays with Luke, kind of, but stays on the edge also to get objectives. And then Fen stays kind of somewhere in the middle, flying a little bit cagey, but usually staying with both Keo and Luke to punish ships. Now, this is a weird one. So you've got 2 initiative 6 ships that you want to keep alive as long as possible because they're really good endgame pieces. And of course, that insulates your 7 and 5, was that 12 squad points that keeps them from dying. You've got the very tanky Luke Skywalker to also insulate another 5 points. And then you've got the very difficult to hit Keo, who's only 3 points, but is a really tempting target for a lot of players because it's much easier to take down than the other 4. So this is a strange list. So it's a very hard-hitting list with Han. It's a very heavy jousting list with Luke. It's a pretty great endgame list with Fen, the I-6 Fang Fighter. And then it's a good objective one with Keo. But each of these in a limited fashion. It's not a full jousting list. It's not a full ace list. It's not a full objective list. It doesn't do any of those things all that well. Like a specialist joust list will outjoust this. A specialist objective list will out-objective this. A specialist on a tanky list will out-tank this. But it does all of these things. And each individual piece is independent and does what it does very well. But there are a couple significant weaknesses to this list that did hold it back in some dramatic ways. Number 1, Fen Rao. I love Fang Fighters. It's one of my favorite ships in the game, but a 5-point Fang Fighter is just begging to blow up. Yes, Beskar helps. Yes, it can live on those green dice, but it can also just pop in one round of shooting those 4 hull that rolls all hits, which your Beskar does nothing to stop. Yeah, so putting a 5-point on there is extremely risky. And the biggest downside of Fang Fighters in general is consistency, where if you're going to go through a long tournament and play at your top level and win, you have to not only have good pieces, you have to have good pieces that do what they do well every time, not just some of the time, every time. And a Fang Fighter is not going to do it, especially a 5-point Fang Fighter. A couple of 4-point Fang Fighters, maybe, but a 5-point, no. So that's kind of a weak point in the list that does perform well in some cases, but it's one of the first things that I see about this. But it was a very successful list for a long time, so who am I to say? And then Keo, of course, the juke is always tempting, but what I've seen a lot of players also do is throw on those missiles because Keo does not do any significant damage. And if one of the other 3 ships dies, the damage output in this list just plummets immediately because it is fairly small, got a lot of eggs in one basket. Luke dies, or especially Han dies, suddenly the list has noticeably fewer teeth. And if you're outnumbered against other 3-die attack guns, it will go down real fast, or at least will lose the attrition battle in ways it didn't before. And then also looking at, I mean, Luke is Luke. Luke has not changed. Luke is arguably one of the best 5 points in the entire game, period. But he does only have 2 evade dice, even with the benefits he's got, even with the defensive force that adds on there, even with that decent amount of hit points, he goes down if you hit him. When I played against this list, I went for Luke first and I killed him in both games where I went up against it. I think at least one. But he goes down. So under concentrated fire, even with the force modifier, he's still only throwing 2 dice. So if you're hitting him with 4, 5, or even multiple 3-die attacks, he's going to go down, not as quickly as you'd expect a X-Wing to go down, but much faster than any medium or large base will. So that's something to keep in mind as kind of a weak point of the list. And then Keo, of course, is a trap. She's a really, really durable, very, very fast ship, but she is still an A-Wing. And while it is a trap to shoot at her, because even if you take down Keo, you get 3 points. Yay! And then the other ships will already have been doing a lot of work in that meantime, unless you take out Keo in the first couple turns. That said, she's still an A-Wing. So as an objective grabber, she is still vulnerable to a lot of things like bomb control, any damage that isn't blocked by evade dice. So bombs, Vader crew, there are a lot of things that could really mess up Kyo in a dramatic way because she is a fragile piece. And this list is really hinging on none of these pieces going down too quickly because it will then, again, run out of steam fairly quickly. Now, the final thing and kind of the number one change on this, actually the ship count is the number one thing that's changed on this. Number two is going to be the upgrades on Han, because I mentioned why chopper is important and the off chance that you have that crit that gives you 2 stresses or you get 2 stresses somehow. Some mechanic in the game gives you multiple stress. Chopper will let you still do your focus. That is so extraordinarily rare that even the 1 point is often not worth it. Likewise for engine upgrade, the cases where you would need to boost, usually you can't. And there is almost no case where you'd rather boost than focus. Even if you're going to go close to if the boost would put you a range 0 to 1 a rock where you otherwise weren't, having the 2 focuses is almost always going to be better. So people just kind of dropped both of those. So this again is the old school style of the list. Let's take a look at the new one that we just saw from this weekend that Cam Murray used to win the Saint-Laurent Open. So right off the bat, we're seeing a couple changes here. So Han's loadout, right off the bat, swaps both the engine upgrade and chopper. I'll drop the title on there because that's still there. Maybe I actually didn't see it in the screenshot of his list. Dropped both chopper crew and engine upgrade for trick shot, which since he's trying to orbit rocks all the time and stay on the outside of the board, anytime you get a trick shot, you've got 2 shots that are throwing an extra die each for an extra 2 attack dice, which most of the time you take trick shot, it's not all that great. But in the case of Han, he's throwing so many attacks that even if it triggers once in a game, it's worth the points. So that is going to be much better than the other 2 that are situational and will never trigger, because it's one that does trigger fairly frequently and really adds to that offensive output dramatically. Next up, we still have Luke, totally unchanged. We're going to skip ahead to Kyo, because Kyo's here, but Kyo instead has concussion missiles, lone wolf, and vectored cannons. Now, vectored cannons turns her primary attack into a turret that she can rotate to the rear arc. And since she's got concussion missiles, you can park that in the rear arc and leave it there, and it still is quite a quick ship. Now, you lose some of the multi-position options. I believe you lose the double action, but she's still an A-wing, still a very potent piece, and is still 3 points. And this build makes her way more dangerous. If you're in a mirror match, one of the things I've seen a lot is cheap A-wings used to block Han to kind of keep him slow and keep him in a position where he's not getting the attacks he wants, and also is not getting the attacks that he wants, and then also is just slower. So, but the problem is, if you do that, usually your A-wing is pointed away from him and doesn't get shots, even range 0 shots. I just in that I don't remember if it was the final or the second to last. I think it was the second to last in the top 4. There were 2 A-wings, Hera and Kyo, were both blocking and opposing Han for the entire game and did not shoot it at all. Had they both had vectored cannons, they could have been plinking away at it. One of them would have been throwing 2 dice at range 0. The other would have been throwing 3 dice at range 1 with mods. So that could have made a significant difference and could have won the game. And so vectored cannons are something that people tend not to do because A-wings are expensive and they are a little bit ACC rely on the maneuvers, but definitely give those another look, especially if you can also take missiles or some other front arc weapon. So you do have offense out the front, especially on a cheaper A-wing like Kyo. You don't bring her to do damage, but if she can in a key moment, awesome. So that's I really like that loadout a lot more than the one we saw before, especially the vectored cannons. Didn't expect that, but once I looked at it and started thinking about it, I was like, all right. So you converted me, Cam. Good job. Next up, you do see here that 2 ships were split into 3. So instead of, well, excuse me, 2 ships were, no, 1 ship was split into 2. Here we go. So this actually gives up Fen, be a little vindicated there, just saying, to take 2 additional ships. And that is both Sabine, the 2-point TIE fighter with Beskar reinforced plating, which is a little bit silly. And her ability is, before you activate, you may perform barrel roll or boost action, which makes her very quick and dodgy. She's 2 points, so you really don't worry about losing her or not. Will do damage during the game sometime, somewhere, and is an excellent just distracting harassment piece and terrific on objectives. So absolutely worth it. And then Hall Oakland is the other 3 points, which still feels a little weird. This is the quick build, a Y-wing, which I love. Quick build Y-wing from the Battle of Yavin as well. So during the system phase, if there are no enemy ships at range 1 to 2, you may recover 1 charge on any upgrade. So early gamer, if this guy nopes out of there, he can regain a charge on that advanced proton torpedoes, which is still a lot of setup, and so it may never come into play. But if it does, you're throwing a 5 red die attack, and he's a 3-point ship. So still really good. and just trades the situational value of a bunch of green dice and the Beskar plating for just a bunch of hull, a bunch of hit points. So this guy is not going down in one hit, probably not going down in 3 hits. It takes a while to take him down, and he's not something you want to shoot at. Excuse me just a sec. So we're looking at a list that suddenly has all of the objective control and board control advantages that the original version didn't, while still keeping the strongest pieces of the original list, all 3 of them, and tweaking them a little bit to where they're much more dangerous. The addition of trick shot, the change to the Lone Wolf concussion missiles Kyo with the vectored cannons, and then another objective grabber and another tanky piece to take and dish out damage. This is a dramatically improved version of the list, and it was quite scary when I saw it in that final matchup on the Gold Squadron stream. I'll go ahead and throw a link to that in the video when I put this up. So both of these still have the same core, though. You got Han, you got Luke, you've got objective grabbers, and then other ships. Filler. Could be a number of different things. I've seen other things too. How do you deal with this? So Han, if you block him, you keep him in place. So let's back up a bit. So the number one way to beat this is objective control, or that was the number one way to beat the original version, the original Menace. That may have been Jeremy Chambly. I'll go ahead and give credit for launching this one. I'm not totally sure, though. But so the original Menace really lost out to objectives and also really struggled with beef, which is why, excuse me, we saw that Republic Arc list pop up to sort of challenge this thing. Republic Arcs, double decimators, these are things that can take a whole lot of hits and just control the board in ways where they put a big areas where Han does not want to go and don't particularly care if he's plinking at them with 2 shots a game. So you can actually see this is a bit of a response to that, where this now focuses more on board and objective control, and so gives more targets for those things to deal with and is able to plink more damage off of 1 evade or 0 evade ships. And then also that trick shot is big for giving you a little bit of extra punch against those really big, beefy ships, so you do extra damage. So this kind of tweaks itself to be better against those kind of counters to the original list, and then also does just kind of do some things better, even if it trades out the endgame ace piece of Fen. I seriously doubt that that was good enough to justify taking up the spot of 2 individual objective grabbers in most games and most missions. So this is a really good list. So again, how do you deal with this? What do you do? So if you block Han, he can still red focus and still get the double focus results and still more or less get the same thing he had before. If you jam Han, he will lose 1 of those focus tokens, but still have the second, and then will still either be able to do a double mod or fire that second shot. So it does hamper him a little bit, but not a whole lot. So blocking slows him down, keeps him in one place, adds a stress, which does make him a little bit less flexible the next turn, which is good. Jam will kind of reduce the output of his attacks, and you can do both. And the thing about Han is, when you're approaching this list, you have a couple options. Do you focus on objectives and take out some of the easy targets because there aren't really any, or do you double down and take on Han? For me personally, I think the better way to go is to take down Han. Of course, kind of shoot and dodge and do objective stuff on your way, but have a plan to trap and take down Han Solo, because once you start pumping crits into that thing, it goes down real fast. Even with the rerolls, even with the just chunk of hit points it's got 1 evade die. So once you start throwing 2 or 3 dice at it for long enough, it starts going down fairly quickly. And once you bring that down, this list loses a lot of its teeth. That's another reason why this list has been switched to a 4-ship, is because it loses less of its effectiveness as a squad, as a board control, objective control squad, if Han goes down. But still, Han, especially with that trick shot, is one of the scariest pieces, so you do want to go ahead and take him out. Another kind of tricky piece is going to be your seismic charges, because Han only gets those free rerolls if he has objective or obstacles at range 0 to 1. So just blow up the obstacles, get rid of them. Also, that is a deployment concern where you can set up your obstacles where they're difficult to fly around, where they're spread out and there are large gaps between them. So Han really has a challenge trying to stay at range 0 to 1 of both to get those rerolls. So you can do a positioning play at your turn 0, just kind of consider where he's going to be and put some in places where they're not going to be helpful in terms of where the objectives are going to be placed or if threats are going to happen. So these are all kind of ways to control him. Another really big thing that Han doesn't like is Ion. Now, it is still a bummer because even if you Ion him, the one action you can still do while Ioned is focus, which is the one action he wants to do. But it does control his mobility and leave him kind of in a specific spot where you can focus him down and kill him. Now, if you do start controlling Han's motion, you want to keep controlling Han's motion. And being a large base, it's somewhat easier to block or get in his way, even though that dial is pretty open. Those 3 turns are pretty hard to block, the 3 sloops, the 4K. It's pretty hard to get in the way of all of those. But if you do keep him stressed, so with the blocks of stressing, any way you can apply stress, that will prevent the 4K. So even if he does the 4 straight, he will remain stressed. And if he does the 4 straight and does not block, that will keep him stressed. So you can kind of gum up the 1 to 3 area, or you can play a little bit tricky and you can block him so he's stressed and then move out of the way so you don't block him the following turn. So when he does a blue to try to clear the stress and then hope for the bump focus, he doesn't get it and ends up in a vulnerable spot. But yeah, so a blocked and stressed Falcon is still positive, but it doesn't really slow it down unless you follow that up with beating the heck out of it. So that's one way to take this down. Focus down Han, control pieces, different things to do there. The other way is to just kill Luke, because again, he is surprisingly the best bang for your buck. If you kill Luke, you get 5 points. And if you focus him down, he actually goes down fairly quickly, surprisingly quickly. So have a plan to do either of those and really know which one it's going to be fairly on. Han is harder to control, harder to catch, but easier to limit once he starts going down. Again, once you start piling crits on him, it becomes a much less scary piece very quickly, especially if you can control his positioning at all. Whereas Luke is just going to die. He'll be every bit as dangerous until he dies. And he does have regen, so you do need to hit him consistently for a while. Otherwise, he can come back rejuvenated with up to 2 shields. That said, just kill him in 1 turn. Problem solved. Then again, you can also deal with these guys. So in the final match, we saw a lot of sort of back and forth trying to take down these and a lot of damage spread out. Han took a bunch of damage, including a couple crits, but it wasn't enough to actually turn around the game. And one thing that this list absolutely loves is attrition. So this is one of those lists where it can tank a bunch of damage. So you want to focus down your targets, which is generally a really good rule in X-Wing anyway, but particularly so against this because of how powerful and how expensive some of these pieces are, or how hard to hit they are versus the amount of points you get for actually taking them down. So looking at this from a scum perspective, one of the things that, again, Han really doesn't like is ion control, which he's a large base ship. So you have to nail him with 3 ion tokens to actually give him an ion maneuver and force him to do the tough move. But while you're doing that, Scum also has things like Gar Saxon Gunner, who can take off an ion token to roll an extra attack die and really be a devastating hit against Han, especially a ship with such little evade that doesn't want to take those hits. You've also got Genius if you want to get really weird. So your Y-Wings, your cheap 3-point Y-Wings can fly really, really fast and drop seismic charges after they move. So you can quickly remove some key obstacles and leave Han without rerolls. And going back to the ion control, it does take 3 charges to ion Han, but if you bring Dace Bonearm, all of a sudden it takes 1 ion charge to ion the guy. And that can really mess him up very quickly. So in the 2 games that I played, in one of them, I focused on objectives and killed all of the ships except for Han himself, and I won that. In the other one, I went after Han himself and got crit stopped myself. There were 2 real nasty moments. There was 1 bump, well, 3, excuse me. There was 1 bump, I hit 1 rock, and then I was running Boba Fett at the time. Boba got a crit that really stopped him from chasing Han. So a 3 hit point Han, instead of being range 1 of a very, very scary and angry Boba Fett, ended up out of arc at range 3 and was able to get away in that last couple of turns. I wasn't able to catch him, but it was so close. And the reason I did that is I brought Lima Kai with an ion cannon turret. That Han got cheeky and tried to joust me, and so I ioned it and walked it across the board for a bit and almost killed it before it got away. So that's the thing. If you are playing with this list, do not charge Han into the scrum, especially not against Ion. You can be Ioned, don't risk it. And then if you're playing against this, if Han goes into the scrum, shoot the heck out of him. Because it's a ship that if it is giving up most of its advantages will die quickly. If it has all of its advantages, it will still die just a little bit more slowly. So you just got to kind of hold up. But to kind of talk about, and I'm almost done, but we're going to keep going through this. So one of the key lists that beat this, and it's one of the ones that consistently beat it, was triple arcs, the Arc 170s in the Republic, plus the very cheap Ada Anakin, the Siege of Coruscant standardized loadout Ada Anakin, and then ye old Padme Amidala, which is really cool to see. Because while Han Solo's ability doesn't count as a reroll, it does count as a mod. And so Padme's ability reads that if an enemy ship is in your front arc, it may only modify a single eyeball result. So if Han used a reroll, it could then, so say it rolled an eyeball and 2 blanks, rerolled the blanks, and then they got 3 eyeballs and had a focus. You could then spend 1 focus to get a single hit. You could not mod any other eyeballs before that, reroll or any other way. So really, really powerful, especially since that would apply without limit to both of Han's attacks. So it's a good piece. Doesn't completely shut it down, but basically completely shuts it down. But the other kind of key piece that made that list so effective against this Han list is it's got 3 arcs. That's an enormous amount of board control. And even as Han is just spraying dice at them, it takes a really long time to take down an Arc 170, let alone 3 Arc 170s that are sharing tokens and have that born for this ability to just kind of feed off each other and have big defensive buffs while you've got an I6 kind of dancing around and being obnoxious. Yeah, but so the biggest thing that does is not care how much it's shot at, plus a couple extra pieces specifically tailored to take down Han. Another piece that does fairly well against Han is your 2 decimators, your reinforced decimators, because they are surprisingly fast, do a lot of damage, and it gives limited targets for Han to shoot at, and each of them will take less damage and not particularly care, while they're throwing absolutely unholy amounts of fire on Han himself. And then if you also have things like Death Troopers to double stress enemy ships nearby, or have them not remove their stress tokens, that's really good. And then also Darth Vader crew, although that gives up Darth Vader pilot. But if you take Darth Vader crew, lets you do that free unblockable damage or the jam effect, both of which will really mess up these cheap AC things. Like both Sabine and Keo do not want that to happen. So there's some really, really powerful pieces that play well into this. The downside, though, is that they have tougher matchups in the rest of the meta. So the other things that play well against other lists will beat those more than those beat the Han Falcon list. So right now you can kind of see where the strengths of the list come out. So again, top level strategy, you look at this list, look at your list, decide, will I kill Han? Or will I play really hard at the objectives, play cagey, and take out some of the other ships? Both of those are equally challenging, but one of them is more straightforward. So if you just decide to gun for Han, cage him in, just blow him to pieces, that is a pretty strong odds of victory, assuming you're able to avoid some of the worst attacks. And the tools that will be really good against Han will also be really good against Luke and the other pieces in this list. With Han, you jam him, you take off potentially either his mod or his bonus attack if he spends the focus to mod an attack. With Luke, if you jam him and remove his focus token, he suddenly can't fire his proton torpedoes anymore, which is huge. So having some jammers in your list is really, really good on this one. And especially my favorite Hondo Onaka crew you coordinate Sabine, who cares, and you jam Luke. So you take a modded shot from Sabine instead of a proton torpedo. Win. So yeah, there are mechanics that will work not just against Han, but also against other things in the list. Also, if you have ion control or really hard-hitting attacks designed to take on Han, they will work just as effectively against Luke. So you can say, like, can I get Han? No. Let me turn these heavy guns on Luke and take him down, and then we'll go from there. I would tend to avoid going after the others because that's a net total of 8 points between 3 ships that take a long time to bring down. So you want to pick one of the high-value targets. You want to take that down and get the points for that while scoring your objectives, and then go from there, see where you are. And that's kind of where we're at. So again, from a scum perspective, I do really like ion control against this because some of those lists would come out, and I'll talk about scum lists in a minute and things that people aren't trying. That'll be a follow-up video that I do fairly soon. But yeah, so ion control, you've got a lot of Seeks and I believe 1 mining guild tie, maybe 2. They can take ion cannons. You got Dace Bonearm, already one of the best ships in the scum faction, has the ability to supercharge your ion hits. So you hit Luke or Luke only takes 1 ion. You hit Han with 1 ion token, and you can choose whether or not you want to ionize him right then. And then you also can mix that up. So if you're taking 2 3-point ion ships, Lima Kai with the ion turret is also one of my favorite pieces. People take torpedoes on her a lot, or on him a lot, excuse me. I don't particularly like taking target locks with Lima, so I end up taking the turret so I can focus or barrel roll or whatever and not worry about having to take those locks. And that ion control is really good, gives you the extra die at initiative 5, and really encourages people to spend their defensive tokens because they don't want to be ioned. And I did successfully ion Han Solo, ion Darth Vader in the same day. So it is a really powerful piece. And then so you mix that. So you take, say you take Lappin, the mining guild tie that has the ion cannon turret. You take Dace, and then you take Lima with the ion cannon turret. That is 10 points. So you still have the points for a 6-point and a 4-point. So you could do like a YV666. or Dengar or something else there in that list, and then another 4-point, or you can mix quite a bit in there. You could throw in another no, not three. You can throw in several more 3-point ships, more ion cannons, or you can throw in a couple 4-point ships and a 2. There's a lot of different ways you can build around that, and that is both very good board control, somewhat durable with the combination of the TIE Fighter and the Y-Wing. You can also throw in some Seeks that have ion cannons, and then of course you have Dace, who's just kind of a power piece in and of himself. Yeah, and for me, I really like Hondo Crew for the reasons I mentioned. The power of that jam, that range 3 jam, that will really kind of ruin Han or Luke's day. More so Luke's, but also very powerful against Han. Very, very powerful piece because of the range, where a lot of the time Han is going to be out of your average jamming range, but Hondo Crew can do it. Captain Seevor TIE Fighter can do it, or your lovely false transponder codes illicit can do it. So your Razor Crest is also a really good piece against this, because you can choose in the system phase when to have your illicit available and say like, hey, in this turn, I'm going to target lock you and it will jam you. And you weren't able to clear that before because the card was face down. So Scum is actually unusually capable of dirty tricks that will challenge this list in ways the current meta does not. There's a lot there that we're going to talk about. And then also a couple others, some really good ones. No one is taking Torkel Mux, the Hawk, anymore, because why would you? But if you point that thing at Han and suddenly instead of firing at initiative 6, he's firing at initiative 0. So you have plenty of time to sink damage into him and strongly encourage him to spend his focus tokens on defense before he actually gets the offense out there. And that will seriously limit his ability to kill ships before they attack, which is really big. Or you can pop it on Luke and have the same effect. So there's a lot you can do there that will be very, very good. Surprisingly so in Scum. So we'll talk about that more later. In terms of other stuff, again, the board control things we already talked about do really well against Han. Also, we did see that some of the other meta monsters right now are your 5 or 6 ship First Order, or your 5 or 6 ship Resistance that have a bunch of T-70s or a bunch of TIE SFs or FOs. They have your different sort of like mix of those ships up to 5 that all have similar hit points and stats. Those are good, but the problem is as they start to lose damage, and these just kind of plink damage on individual targets all across the board, and then Han is there to finish them off. So if 2 ships are on the board in his arc at down to like 2 to 3 hit points, there's a very good chance he can take out 2 per turn. So that's something you really want to watch out for, and that's one of the reasons that Han keeps popping up, is we have this kind of meta dance where the different builds are chasing each other, because 5x T-70s is really good against double decimators, but it struggles against Han because of that attrition. But if you are bringing 5 T-70s, you have the offensive output to take down Han. Go for him, gun for him, kick his butt, take him down. If you take him down, the attrition fight suddenly turns around in your favor, and you have a much better chance of taking on the rest of this list, plus you're 7 points ahead than you are if you kind of try to ignore him. Because that's the thing, is if you ignore Han, you have to have a list that can tank that damage or not care, which is very rare. So I think I'm leaning on the point of kill Han, which is a bummer because I like Han, but shoot him. Going back to Scum, last point, I promise we're done. Moralo Oval Pilot is the last thing in the world that Han wants to see, because it can take itself off the board and then pop up right behind him with a range 1 180 arc that he can't avoid, and you can load that sucker up with some upgrades that really do significant damage very quickly. And you can do that twice. It's just fantastic. So there's a lot of stuff to throw in there. A lot of stuff you can try out to make a very powerful list to counter the Han list. But of course, you have to be careful that it also counters other stuff as well. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was a good breakdown of how this list works and kind of what you can do about it. But also it was kind of cool to take a look at this in terms of the original version and how it's kind of evolved in the meta, or one branch of the evolution it's taken since the original form, because that also can kind of tell you a lot about how other lists could evolve, what pieces they do, what they do well. So we could look at this and see what equivalents other factions can do, or the same faction can do something similar. So we may revisit that in another video. This one's already quite long, so we're going to stop. Appreciate your time and patience. Hopefully this was a useful video.